Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's edition of Outdoor Hospitality Weekly. What we hope is going to be your go-to show for all things outdoor hospitality. Why don't we start, guys, since we're brand new to this and getting into it, just a quick introduction of who we are, really what we do in the space, and what kind of value we think we can bring to the industry. So, Matt, why don't I start with you?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Excited to be jumping into this with both of you guys. And my name is Matt Whittermore. I'm based in Syracuse, New York. I am head of real estate at Roll Campgrounds. Got into the business over 3 years ago. Bought my first little rustic campground in the Catskills of New York called Covered Bridge Campsite. That has been an adventure and a labor of love. Lots of fun things happening there that I'm sure we'll dive into in episodes to come. Since then, bought two more campgrounds, one down the street from there and one in central Massachusetts. And then over the last year, figured out, along with our founder Gerard Ramos, to what our goals were going to be, and jumped on board. And so now we're up to 7 campgrounds total and looking to buy a bunch more and put our fingerprints on this industry. So excited to do that with both of you, and excited to talk shop here.
And Adam, you're really on site and a part of our ops team. Can you talk about really how you fit into the role operation?
Yeah, so I'm Adam Al-Sergani, and I mostly work out of Geneseo, Illinois, from Geneseo Campground, which is our flagship and legacy camp. I largely manage that camp as well as sort of contribute to the managing outreach, bookings, and marketing of our other campgrounds. I've got a long history editing and ghostwriting for real estate folks. So I bring an odd angle of that expertise and hopefully a lot of camping experience, right?
Awesome, Adam. And then for me, as far as my background goes, I've been in the space for a long time and have bounced around at a number of different organizations, rising from Yogi Bear's Jellystone Park Resorts and Spacious Skies Campgrounds, and then obviously here now with the Roll team, sort of leading the charge when it comes to operations and marketing and all of our on-site teams across our portfolio of parks. So yeah, let's jump into today's topic, guys. And I think this one will be a really good one for really anybody who's looking to get into the industry, trying to understand things from a holistic viewpoint, as well as operators like us trying to again maybe separate yourself from the day to day of your individual park and look holistically at how the economics of the campground industry works, and what the different parts and pieces are. So I think really a good starting point is always the tipping point from supply and demand, right? And we talk a lot about the difference between public versus private campgrounds and the amount of campsites that are available. Really we know that in the private market, there's around 2.5 times as many campsites as what might be at public, state, national, Bureau of Land Management type parks. And I think that, this really aligns with our portfolio and the way in which we bought stuff. Out of the private campgrounds that exist, only 12% of those fall in the Northeast and 21% in the Midwest and Central regions. And that's where most of our operating parks are. So, do you both really see that as a big opportunity, as sort of the next frontier of where these parks are coming from? And how do you think about finding that right mix of sites?
I'll jump in here first. It's a really interesting question. Having started my career in the Northeast with campgrounds that cater primarily to full season renters, meaning these campgrounds are typically closed in the winter, they open in May, they close in October, and up to 100% of the sites are dedicated to people that rent for that entire period and usually stay for years upon years. And we have campers that have occupied sites at our campgrounds for 20, 30 plus years, which is kind of amazing. But it creates a really interesting supply and demand dynamic where in the Northeast, there appears to really be a shortage of those transient sites, nightlies, weeklies, and the supply and demand is really out of whack on the seasonal campsites too. A professionally run seasonal campground typically will have a lengthy waiting list for people to come in and rent one of those seasonal sites. So it's if I've learned anything in my few years in this business, it's that camping is very much a regional business, and the region that you're in really affects the operations and the style and business model of the campground. So it's particularly interesting to look at the split of private campgrounds versus public campgrounds. When you look at the public inventory, it's pretty much entirely in the West. When you look
only
at the
only 4% of those public parks are in the Northeast, right? Like that's a crazy amount.
Yeah, and it's so interesting talking to the customers, and there's just like there's the people that are very outdoorsy, hardcore campers. They've got the overlanders, and they're trying to find their little slice of paradise on BLM land and not have another soul in sight, and just go out there and rough it and have no cell service and just really have that experience, which is a far cry from our average customer in a lot of ways. I think we do kind of bridge that gap with some of our campsites that are hike-in primitive tent sites where you do largely feel like you're the only person out there, but you're a short walk to a bathhouse that's been renovated, a store, a friendly face, some Wi-Fi if you want to jump on and see what the town has to offer via the internet. But yeah, it's a really interesting market to study. So fragmented, not a ton of good data sources out there. So that's what we've put a ton of our time and effort into, is trying to have a really good data source to search and query and filter and slice and dice and try and get a really good picture of what is the supply. Like you talk about apartments or office buildings or shopping centers, you can get a subscription to CoStar or whatever, there's all these services out there. There is not that for campgrounds. You've got to really build your own database and put a lot of time and effort and investment into it. So it's fun. It's fragmented. Everybody's kind of figuring out as they go, as I see it at least. And it's a fun time to be in the industry.
And Adam, from your perspective too, I mean, what do you see as far as Midwest campgrounds go, right? You're based out of Illinois. Are things maybe a little bit different there, as Matt kind of talked about the regionality and sort of the differences between some of our Northeast properties and what's happening out in the Midwest?
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt's absolutely right, that campgrounds are a wildly regional thing, both in terms of who your campers are, right? When you're talking about the Northeast, you're talking about, 20, 25% of the MSAs in the country, depending on whether you're talking about size or population and where you draw those lines. But you're talking about significantly fewer camps, both in terms of public and private. And oftentimes some of those camps are quite a bit smaller than they're going to be in the Midwest. The Midwest, because there's a lot more farmland, I think also because there's a longer history, especially in the upper Midwest and kind of central Midwest of snowbirding. You're going to see a lot of folks who are staying for a season or for a period of time, who tend to be much more in line with an aging group of primarily boomer campers who have quite a bit of money, who want some of the comfort features of that. And right, like, I don't think of this as a bad word, but right, like a lot of redneck campers in the Midwest, right? Like I'd proudly consider myself one of them, who are coming in, who enjoy the process of like maintaining their own rigs, um, who love coming out, doing the family thing. And, if you're, where we're at in Geneseo, and I think this is true down into Missouri and up into Wisconsin, you see a lot of farms that have 2, 3 rigs sitting out on them. And sometimes that's because there are multiple family members storing them there, which I do think influences what those Northeast campgrounds look like. Where do you put a larger rig? And then how do you, if you can't get people financially and in terms of space, vehicles and equipment, right? What does that mean for the kind of equipment you provide, right? It might mean more glamping units, more park models, more of that stuff. In the Midwest, I think there's probably a lot less call for some of that, although we do have some of it, right? We still do see folks who want to stay in our yurts or cabins or that kind of stuff. But I think there's much more of that desire to come out, see people. And we don't have the big, vast spaces of the West, and we don't have some of the streams and mountains of the East, right? So some of that is much more about cultural space in the Midwest. And that's a positive for campgrounds, right? That people want to come out, they want to drink beer, they want to talk to friends, they want to like bring their cousins out, they want to park next to their cousins and catch up and have family reunions and that sort of stuff here.
I think that's a really great point, Adam. Right, and we've seen data too that both in public and private, there's the majority share of the sites that are available belong to RV and tent campers, and so you look at that opportunity as rigs continue to get larger and larger, and infrastructure in certain parks isn't there. Right? Does it lend itself really nicely to glamping and other cabin accommodations and adding that to the mix? And really, what is the right mix of site types and amenities? And it's a question we've talked a lot about internally on what types of things fit the types of parks that we have in our portfolio and what makes sense. I mean, from a roll side, right, we value really strongly those natural amenities and features at all of our campgrounds and the things that can't be replaced that give our guests something to do. But I'll sort of tee that up to you both as well, right? What is the right mix of site types? And, have we considered adding lodging and other types of units into the mix at our parks?
Great question. And I think leads to a lot of commentary about the state of the market, the investment market. It's a pretty small niche in terms of an investment market. There's not, there's 15,000 campgrounds. Only a certain portion of those are deemed to be revenue wise or number of sites wise worthy of either a private equity firm or some other type of investment fund to come in and purchase those. So with all the buzz around the industry, we see lots of activity chasing after a limited number of opportunities to purchase, which drives up the prices, which forces the buyers to get more creative with driving revenue and getting into the glamping market. The higher end lodging market seems to be one of the chosen paths to achieve the revenue that you need to justify what is coming to be the market price for these investments. There's also just tons of demand. We've seen that and we've proven it out for these lodging options. So I think there's a real opportunity. There's demand, and it's. I think property by property, there's a perfect mix to find. That's what's so special and challenging about this industry in my mind is that, you're going to try and come up with averages if you're building a large portfolio and general strategies. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to knowing that specific property, knowing that specific market. Like, for example, properties in New York, 2 hours northwest of Manhattan. That's just a special dynamic that, we could take one of our smaller rustic campgrounds and turn it into a landscape hotel or a landscape resort and potentially have 30 units that generate $500 a night in ADR and solid occupancy. And that's going to make way more revenue than any type of campground will. We love the camping business, so I don't think we want to get into a habit of taking campgrounds out of circulation, if you will. You know, we don't want to diminish the supply of campsites. We want to increase it. That's part of our mission is serving campers. And so I think that leaves us trying to find that perfect mix. I think it's somewhere around 20 or 30% lodging per campsite. If you have 100 sites, you have 20 or 30 lodging units. And that's probably distributed across very rustic cabins, $80, $90 a night type cabins, glamping tents. You can get real fancy with the glamping tents, or you can go real rustic, all the way up to these fancy modern park models that we see that, you know, in certain locations we're achieving, you know, $300, $350 plus a night, at least on the weekends, and really solid occupancies. So it's something we're feeling out at every individual location and trying to, you know, over the first few years of ownership, learn the market as best we can, talk with the customers, test different things through our marketing, and find out, you know, we want to serve the demand. We don't want to just determine what we want to have there. We want what's going to make the most sense in terms of serving the demand of the outdoor hospitality customer.
Adam?
Yeah, I think that this is another one of those questions that, I mean, not only is it regional in terms of, right, like, what is the demand? You know, I already said that speculatively, I really do believe there's a lot of room for like park models and like glamping units in the Northeast. That said, right, like, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I didn't see campers every week who come in from the Northeast, who are from, you know, Houston area or somewhere farther out west, and they say to me, you know, like, I can't believe that you're only like $55, $60 a night, right? Like, I just paid $180 in Jersey, and I was like so mad about it. You know, it was, otherwise I had to drive another 2 hours or something, right? And the relationship to that too is very different if you happen to be in the Midwest, where, right, like, prices are going to be much more in that $60 to $90 range. That said, right, like, a lot of the units that we have in the Midwest, they do get filled by folks from Indianapolis, Chicago, right, who are looking for that. And I think it's a valid desire to get out into the outdoors, and it's not a market to ignore. I think especially post-COVID, you know, the KOA, like, 10-year report emphasized this heavily, that, you know, a lot of people wanted to get out into the outdoors, and I really believe that many of those people want to stay experiencing those things, and they need that stepping stone into that space, right? Like, over Labor Day, I had a camper call me up, and they'd rented a tent site something like 6 months in advance, and asked me if he was having an argument with his wife, and was, I think, trying to prove her wrong, and said, like,
That's dangerous.
so will the tent be up for us when we arrive, right? And so some of that's about seeing the demand, right? Knowing who's coming in and how do we welcome them into that space, while also, right, like, what I don't want to see anywhere is forcing a bunch of people who are active RVers and overlanders as they travel across the country into casino parking lots and Walmarts. Right? Like, that's not the goal. And figuring that out with what's that revenue look like, I think, you know, Matt's much better with these numbers, and so I'm deferring to him, but I've also kind of like looked at some of his numbers, and that 20 to 30% is probably right, to keep those spots open to keep occupancy, and if we can keep those spots filled, really like drive revenue in a positive way while maintaining the vibe, right? Because people come for the vibe.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that you both just hit on really deeply, and we've all talked a lot about, is really the demand in the space, and diving into that in a deeper way. So we look at statistical surveys just published data in July on retail registrations being right around 36,000. That's down at about 9% year over year from last July. So again, not really a positive signal, but you sort of take a look at that and the debate that's happening in the industry with camper nights being reported down across campgrounds in every state and every region of the country. But data also coming in that says campers want to camp more, and that almost 50% of campers camped 3+ times throughout the summer. Most people stay an average of a little over 9 nights a year in the US, and that a lot of tent campers want to migrate their way into an RV or a cabin unit, or go from a traditional tent like we all probably grew up with in our backyard or in Boy Scouts or whatever, into a luxury glamping tent that they can take their family or their wife on a honeymoon and have a nice getaway, right? So, I mean, how do, I've got my own thoughts too, but how do you guys square that sort of challenge with campers telling us they want to camp more, but it being reported that people are buying less RVs, and campground owners are saying, I'm not getting as many site nights as I was a year before? Where do you guys see that as the state of the market and the demand really that's coming into our parks?
Really interesting thing to dive into. So, I mean, if you look at supply and demand at a super macro level, there's nothing but encouraging signs for this industry. We're in a weird time where, you look at 3 years historical numbers, and that's starting with just such an anomaly of a year, really 2 years between 2020 and 2021. So I think really what you have to do is look at, if you can, get numbers for 2017, 2018, and 2019. If you're working on a deal and you're talking to a broker or a seller, try and get those numbers and just add some context to what you're seeing. I mean, there was just so much demand, so many new campers coming into the market that tried it. And camping's not for everyone. It's never going to be for everyone. So many people just went out and bought RVs and then, probably went to go to the dump station for the first time and were like, well, I'm never doing that again, and gave up camping. Or, you see data about like people camped because of, tough financial times, and because it was perceived to be a safer way to vacation, being outdoors. And now that things are quote unquote back to normal, I say that very loosely, but, they're returning to hotel vacations or typical resort vacations, which is understandable. But I mean, again, back at the macro level, there's something like 11 million RV owners across the country. There's only 2.1 million campsites in the country, approximately. I mean, just thinking about that, I mean, that's just so, heavy on the demand side versus the supply side. And then, you look at how many people go camping. 58 million households in 22. I think that was slightly down in 2023. But still, you compare to the number of people that go camping to the number of campsites, it's positive indicators. I mean, we've seen so much. We were engaged in all like the Facebook groups and everything, and we see anecdotally people, some people, it's a horror story and they're down, 50% month over month, year over year. But then people are having awesome years, and, it's what I point to is like, are you marketing the right way? Are you doing all the things the right way? This is a hospitality business. It's a people business. Every single campground is a unique business model. Yeah, we can glean things from these market insights and datas. And yeah, if you're in the resort market and you can compare yourself to the KOA resorts or Sun communities or equity lifestyle properties, yeah, you have a lot of market data to go to. But, the first campground I jumped into, I loved it because it was absolutely one of a kind, a super special place on a famous fly fishing creek, wild country. It's not uncommon for a black bear to stroll right through your campsite, or for you to see a bald eagle snatch a trout right out of the creek right in front of you. You can watch a beaver build a dam. Like, it's very unique, and I find comfort in focusing on purchasing properties like that are irreplaceable and supremely unique, that I don't worry about demand. People find out who we are and they come back, and they see the campsites that we have to offer, and they come back. We had a few campers, a family actually came back 8 times once in this season. The season's not even over yet. Another handful that came back 4 or 6 times, and these are tent campers. We have super special tent sites and creekfront RV sites. So all this market data is context. It's valuable. It has its place, but it's all taken with a grain of salt in my mind. I love the KOA annual reports, but I also read it knowing that KOA has an objective with those reports. I'm not saying they're putting out false information by any means, but it's framed in a certain way. And that's, we're not a KOA. We're, a KOA to me in a lot of ways is a commodity type campground that for any reason or no reason, somebody might choose another campground down the street over the KOA. And that's not what we're not trying to get into that game. We're trying to have super unique experiences, super unique stays, really, high quality customer interaction and guest experience, and separate ourselves that way. That you might have some flat years. Yeah, I mean, revenue wise, we across our campgrounds, some of them are relatively flat year to year. But again, we're not really marketing the way we should be. We're a new company. A lot of these campgrounds are value add. We're in the middle of our business plan. We don't want to market too heavily prematurely while, we're not totally ready for all the eyes in the world to be on our properties. But we have lots of return customers that come back every year. And, we're not seeing huge dips in revenue. We're seeing a flat year, but ideally it's better than, 20. You should be comparing your numbers to 2019 because that's the last normal year. And, we didn't own any campgrounds in 2019, so we can't really do that. But we've seen seller numbers, and I think we're in a pretty good spot when you look at it that way.
And Matt, I think you did touch on a good point, right? That like the easy money that I think a lot of us got used to in the COVID years has disappeared. And that's where I think a lot of park owners maybe freak out a little bit from the numbers that they were seeing a couple of years ago. And you've got to ask yourself and find ways to continue to enhance the customer experience through your offering, through your customer service, and really separate yourself that way. So Adam,
Right.
you have any thoughts on maybe what I just said or what Matt said as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, right, Matt hits the nail on the head when he's pointing to, right, the nature itself not changing, right? The campground business is, I'd say it's 25% real estate and it's 75% hospitality, right? And they're both, yeah, they're both markets that have fairly large swings year over year, and that are best looked at over the course of 5 or 10 years at a time. And to have COVID in the middle of that really mixes that up, right? I think in some ways, right, a lot of the complaints I hear from other campground owners or people who say they went somewhere and they were surprised at how few rigs were somewhere, oftentimes it is much more of, at least where I'm at in the Midwest, it has been very much, right, resort style campgrounds, right? They tend to cost a lot more, right? In an unsteady market, right, like, you know, bars lose money, sports bars lose money, Budweiser doesn't usually lose money, right? Like, and so, but like, and I'm joking, but the relationship there to being able to get out, to take a vacation, to see that like nature, and how do you amplify that, right? Like, is it by bringing some music to campgrounds? Is it by bringing some like active and guided hikes? Is it by like coordinating activities for kids that maybe aren't like full on pools, which are expensive to build, to maintain and insure? Or is it to like focus on other activities that are going to bring those families that are looking for that intermediary experience? And I think it does depend campground to campground. I also, while Matt was talking, was thinking a lot about this particular thing about COVID. I think he's right. That looking at 2017, 2018, 2019, probably a better like comparative model. But one big thing that I think is really positive for the market, and you hear it from campers and you see it in some of the less fronted data, is that, right, like just like housing, people bought up campers during COVID. And what oftentimes at that time at a high price, low interest rate, and then they shifted into a market that was high interest rate with inflated prices coming down slowly. But either way, right, when you're looking at, America at large, right, depending on the numbers you look at, right, recreational spending is going to be 5 to 10% of family income, right? Like you buy a $30,000 RV or a $50,000 RV, right? Like, depending on what that interest rate is, that payment is a pretty big chunk. Add on to that the cost of gas and travel, etc. And a market where, because there are so many campers on the market, because many of the major manufacturers really pushed out new rigs in that time, I think that a lot of those people are looking for opportunities to use the toys they bought and need to they need that marketing push, that introduction, and that space that welcomes them past that point of fear. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a camper come back because I took the time, I put on some rubber gloves, and I helped them figure out the black tank, right? It's people remember that stuff and they become less afraid by seeing it, right? And I think like once they get past some of those little moments, they want to come back. They want to use those tools. They want to have those experiences. It's about highlighting those experiences, not the
Awesome,
black
Adam.
tank, but the fun.
Yeah, everybody wants great hospitality, but nobody wants to think about waste and all the gross stuff.
Yeah.
So, guys, as we wrap up, I think we'll save sort of the revenue and expense topics for another episode. I think people will find a lot of value in that. How parks are operating with a unique sort of business model through, RV site bookings and store sales and some of these gear rentals and things that we've started to implement at our parks. And again, like everybody knows, right, operating expenses is huge right now, and limiting things like payroll and cutting the necessary expenses. I think, a lot of park owners would find a lot of value in sort of hearing about the way that we would approach that. So as we wrap up, I'll sort of take us back to the beginning of the conversation, right, of if you're an operator, if you're somebody looking to get into the space, what sort of advice would you give people around looking at this data, trying to understand and figure out their particular region where they're looking at purchasing a park right now? Matt, I think, you've touched on it a little bit of, and I think you'll probably touch on this more, right? It's a tool. what we presented today is a part of the conversation. You've still got to ensure that your business is sound and fundamental and you know what you're getting into, right? Is there any other type of advice or something that you would glean from our conversation today that would be impactful to somebody looking to get into the space?
Yeah, there's so much I could talk for hours on that. It's a labor of love. Don't, a lot of real estate investors come into the space either from the mobile home park world or the multifamily world, and there are some similarities, especially with the seasonal campgrounds that are high occupancy and lower maintenance, lower overhead, more efficient investments than like a transient resort park. But really, I would recommend shadowing somebody who runs a park or who owns a park, or if you're in negotiations with mom and pop and it's the middle of the season, go shadow them for a few weeks. Really get into the day to day, because it's hard work. It's long hours. There's no, the only time I believe in this industry there ever was easy money was in the early COVID days. From before that and now, everything is hard earned. Yeah, I mean, irreplaceable locations. If you're in a resort town, there's always, things that are going to draw people. If you're in an incredible location that people walk by, by the thousands every day, you're going to be occupied, but you've still got to provide a good experience. You've got to invite people back, literally and figuratively. So there's nothing easy about this business. There is a frenzy in the market to scoop these things up. I think I was one of those real estate people that thought it was going to be easy money, and I was extremely fortunate to fall in love with the business as an outsider. Because if I didn't, I probably would have given up and thrown in the towel a dozen different times over the last 3+ years. But I saw a really interesting future in the business. It's a lot of fun. It's rewarding to give people a fun place to vacation and connect with nature. So if you find all those things to be true, go for it. We're here as a resource. Reach out. We'll share everything we know, and we'll help you along that path if you're interested. And that's the short version, I'd say.
And Adam, what about you?
Yeah, I think also having a million thoughts on that. I'm going to leap off of uh, Matt's notion there and say that one of the reasons that a campground is not a mobile home park or a multifamily unit is that or even a hotel, really, right? Is that all of those spaces are very much about providing people individual private space. And a campground does do that insofar as they have a designated site. People would like their electrical and water to work. They would like it to be clean. They'd like to have easy access to amenities, right? But one reason people come to campgrounds is their social spaces. And I think as an investor, recognizing that fact is really important, right? Like, I think there's a very different kind of engagement than being a landlord is, right? Like, you're not just there to collect money, you're there to provide and to participate in an experience for those people. And so is anyone who works with you on that project, right? And things will go wrong. And Matt's absolutely right. One reason to shadow is the number of times that something goes wonky and you have to change out a GCFI and an electrical box, or somebody's dog uses somebody else's site and it doesn't get picked up. All that kind of stuff, right? Like, it's little and it's unexpected, and that kind of day-to-day personal interaction, someone wants to look at your face and tell you that that's what happened. is part because it is this whole like communal environment that's shared. And I think that's part of the beauty of it, right? It's a place that people from all different kinds of backgrounds get to come together and enjoy and partake and have a fire and watch that eagle grab a trout out of the water.
Awesome, guys. I think we did it, right? First episode.
Yeah.
That concludes sort of, we'll call this module 1 around the economics of campgrounds. We are planning to publish an episode every week. I think it'll be Friday, but stay tuned and we'll let you know what the official schedule will look like for that. And if you're a park owner or somebody in the industry who wants a particular topic covered, you can always let us know. There are 2 places you can reach us at. You can visit and see all of our campgrounds at roll.camp, and also visit our free blog site where we're going to post articles and resources that will correspond to the shows. And that can be found at ohweekly.substack.com. And again, that's a free subscription that you can get there to get access to all the great written content we're doing in addition to the show. All right, everyone. We will see you back here next week when we dive into revenue and expenses. Thanks, guys.